Republicans are an ignorant, repulsive, and hateful cohort. They are racist, prone to the lure of fascism, and generally ill-natured in their temperament. Republicans lack empathy for others. They oppose freedom, and let's not forget, they also pose an existential threat to democracy. Now, this is not my opinion. These are just the hard, cold facts. Or are they? I'm sure that those to the right of the political spectrum would not only contest these so-called facts, but would also counter that Democrats are irrational liberals who reject reality in favor of utopian ideals that can exist only in the fantasy land of their own belief system. These types of generalizations are painfully common in today's America, dividing our nation into partisan tribes with an increasingly warlike posturing. At this point, it seems it is the culture of our rhetorical thinking about each other that poses a greater threat to our so-called democracy and way of life than the power of one political party or ideology over another. In our current atmosphere of political partisanship, it often appears that both sides have gone completely off the rails of rationality as we cling to the information that upholds our personal beliefs, disregard any evidence that might challenge our beliefs, and, of course, refuse to give the smallest amount of credence to any point of view that contradicts our own. In 2017, just after President Trump was elected and our country's emotions were at an all-time high, a study was conducted to measure a person's willingness to pay actual money to escape the discomfort of exposing themselves to the other side's political views. Incredibly, 2/3 of the subjects surveyed would rather fork out their hard-earned dollars than listen to information that they did not want to hear. So why are we like this? I mean, it seems counterproductive to any kind of progress when people who hold different opinions are so strongly adverse to hearing the other side, making compromises and working together to bring about change. Well, the problem really comes down to the issue of rational thinking versus our brain's susceptibility toward bias. Human cognition suffers from all manner of distortions. In fact, scientists have found over 100 different cognitive biases that repeatedly disrupt the forefront of our reasoned thinking. These biases include optimism bias, which is the tendency to overestimate our chances of success. Availability bias, which is the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of an event or phenomena that consumes our thoughts, such as the possibility of a terrorist attack or being victims of a crime. Familiarity bias, which is a tendency to believe things which are presented on a frequent basis. In fact, even attempting to debunk a false claim through repeated efforts can make the false claim more familiar and thus more believable. The anchoring effect. This is the tendency to overemphasize the first piece of information that we are presented with over all other instances. We have source confusion, which is the tendency to misattribute where we learn information and how we know what we think we know. Superiority bias, which is a tendency to overestimate how competent we are. Fluency bias, which is a tendency to believe things which are easily understood and assimilated into our thinking. For instance, we are more likely to believe unaccented speakers, statements that are written in large, bold type, or statements which are accompanied by photos, even if those photos convey no relevant information. The illusion of asymmetric insight, which is a tendency to presume that we understand other people's thinking and motives better than they understand ours. Perseverance bias. This is the tendency to hold on to beliefs despite disconfirming evidence. And perhaps the most damaging of these many types of bias-based barriers is called meta bias. This is a phenomenon where our own biases blind us to our own biases. We are disinclined to look for personal bias in ourselves, and even less inclined to acknowledge our biases when confronted with them. This natural disinclination makes it very difficult for us to recognize and correct mistakes in our reasoning. So human biases not only pervade our thinking, but they also inhibit our realization that our biases are present, which leads to a very disheartening and almost defeating cycle of impaired human cognition. Why do these rationality-crippling biases even exist? How did humans become hardwired to get stuck in belief cycles that are flawed and even flat out wrong? Well, the answer may lie in our deep ancestral brain. You see, for early humans, there wasn't that much that changed from day to day, and with dangers remaining fairly consistent, well, survival often depended upon acting fast. The quick response patterns created by biases evolved to suit our environment, tuning our brain to make certain guesses or predictions. Cognitive biases once served an important function, but now prove detrimental here in our modern lives. In today's world, we are inundated with new information and ever-changing environments that are, frankly, poorly suited for a simple fight-or-flight cognitive response system. And yet, nonetheless, we humans are stuck contending with the brains that biology has granted to us. So we now know that our thinking is prone to bias, which is a problem. But what feeds these biases and helps us to form our own personal set? The two biggest motivating factors that influence our perception of reality and how we internalize information are emotion and community. Humans are instinctively guided by emotion, and our emotions easily and consistently override our sense of reason. As an example, there was a study where participants were shown conclusive data highlighting the harms of deer overpopulation, which is a problem with a low emotional valiance. Because while it's certainly serious, the issue did not immediately affect the safety and security of the people being surveyed. Next, the participants were presented with data about property crime. Now, this, of course, is a problem with a much higher emotional valiance, but less real impact. The participants were asked to allocate funds to the more pressing problem. And in every instance, the participants awarded more funds to the problem of crime than what the data warranted. To test their premise further, the researchers repeated the experiment, making the damages posed by deer overpopulation even higher, while keeping the data on property crime the same. Regardless of the disparities in data, participants could not be swayed to allocate funds to combat the deer overpopulation. The empirical data simply could not overcome the emotional impact of property crime. Our emotions definitely dictate our opinions about the world, and this makes us easy targets for political rhetoric. Getting a person to feel the way you want them to feel about an issue can be accomplished by simply playing on their emotions to instill a belief and to boost the level of importance that belief holds in a person's worldview. This emotional manipulation can be purposeful or unintentional. It can be accomplished using truth, lies, or something in between. But once established, beliefs driven by emotions, they're extremely hard to sway. Rational arguments backed up by evidence are much more likely to change a person's thinking when we don't particularly care about an issue. When emotions are attached to a belief, then our human biases kick in full force, and it's hard for us to change our minds. Evidence be damned. We will rationalize away arguments that contradict our personal opinions, discount the sources of information, or simply deny the presented truths altogether. It is also human nature to place higher credibility on information that confirms our pre-established beliefs and feeds into our emotional responses. We interpret and make decisions about information through this emotional lens, rather than allowing a better informed and non-biased perspective to prevail. We are all shamefully susceptible to this distorted way of thinking, where intelligence and rationality are eclipsed by the power of emotion. I know this as well because, like anyone else, my emotional responses are a problem that I struggle with on a daily basis. Now, I consider myself to be a rational and intelligent person. I read a lot of credible and well-researched books about cognition and reasoning. I am aware of the personal biases, and I try to push mine aside when processing and interpreting information. But alas, I am human, and all too often my emotions still prevail. Now, I'm going to share an example from my own life, which I'm not incredibly proud of. During the 2016 primary elections, I was not a fan of the Hillary Clinton candidacy. I believe many of my concerns about her presidential bid to be valid, but I must also admit that my high level of emotional involvement in the election certainly distorted my response and interpretations to the information I heard about Hillary Clinton. My personal biases kicked in hard, and I succumbed to the human flaw of seeking out and believing information that would lead to a desired outcome. In this case, the outcome of Mrs. Clinton failing to secure the Democratic Party's nomination. My lowest moment of distorted cognitive reasoning came when I began watching circulating videos that proved Hillary Clinton suffered from a serious and debilitating medical condition, and that her campaign was hiding her failing health from the American public. Now, these videos were full of credible evidence that, if elected president, well, Hillary's term in office would be cut short by illness or possibly even death. Tremors in her hands that indicated an onset of Parkinson's disease. Medical experts giving compelling statements that she showed symptoms of serious physical and mental decline, etc., etc. Because my emotions drove me to dislike Hillary and fear a Clinton presidency, I was primed to embrace and believe even the shakiest evidence that she was unfit for office. I wanted it to be true, and I wanted everyone else to believe in it as much as I did, so that they would make the rational and logical decision to vote against Hillary Clinton in the primary. Of course, despite what I chose to believe back then, Hillary Clinton remains of sound mind and body to this day, and she could have easily served a term as president, of course, without succumbing to death or disease. My 2016 biases allowed me to be duped by misinformation, and this kind of emotional manipulation surrounding political and social issues continues to run rampant across the internet. So, now we know that our biases are very powerful and that our biases are driven by our emotions. But what creates these biases to begin with? The best answer to this question is community. And again, there is historical context to why we behave and think the way we do. Modern scholarship suggests that human reasoning arose from an imperative other than raw survival. It evolved from persuasion. Back when people lived in small nomadic groups where survival depended upon the ability to carve out a secure place within that group, being shunned or cast out, well, that was often a death sentence. By contrast, attaining a position of high status brought about more resources and mating opportunities. Now, an obvious means of gaining dominance over our fellow humans might be through physical force, but this approach invites rivalries. The art of persuasion, however, has a lower cost and higher return. Convincing others to believe and conform to these ideas that would increase their own value in the community was better and ultimately more effective. In this day and age, humans no longer rely on their community to protect them from imminent danger or death. But as human civilization has expanded and evolved, the same basic concepts of survival remain. We decide what actions would work for our best interest as individuals, as a community, or as a country, or even as a world. And we seek safety in the company of other humans who hold the same beliefs. Likewise, the humans around us have an immense influence in shaping our personal belief systems to conform to their own. I recently encountered a very good example of how a community can shape opinion during a discussion that I had with my producer Mackenzie about a historical novel that she is reading. As an aside, I myself am somewhat opposed to the entire concept of nonfiction, but I accept that Mackenzie finds enjoyment when indulging in literary lies, and I can begrudgingly admit that fiction can inspire philosophical thought in ways similar to how facts compel us to ponder our lives. This particular novel of Mackenzie's contains scenes set in California during the mid-1930s, when the state received a large influx of people fleeing the barren Dust Bowl regions of the country. Although these folks hailed from a variety of affected states other than Oklahoma, well, they were collectively referred to by the derogatory term of Okies. And they were hated, feared, and discriminated against by the established Californians. Of course, there are always legitimate problems caused by mass migrations of people from one area to another, so the Californians were not entirely wrong to be concerned for the security of their community. But the high emotion of their worries caused them to demonize the innocent people seeking work and shelter in their state, rather than direct their anger at the actual root of the problem, which held no real emotional value to their community. Mackenzie said this about the book, and I'm going to go ahead and paraphrase here. She said, as I read this book, especially when seeing the events from the perspective of the Oki protagonist, I am infuriated by how humans can mistreat each other so badly, based on a collective and ill informed belief that there is inherently wrong within this other group of people. Yet, as much as I'd love to say that if I had been living in California in that time period, that my thoughts would have been different than anyone else's, I know that's sadly untrue. She said, my opinions would have been shaped by the people around me who I loved, trusted, and respected, and of course relied upon to love, trust, and respect me back. If the overwhelming message I heard from my community and the local newspapers was that the migrants coming into California were dangerous criminals intent on destroying everything we knew and loved, I would very likely believe the same thing. Even if I somehow saw through all the misinformation and recognized that the Okies were hard-working people just like me, with the same hopes and desires for their families, and that they were not dirty and disheveled because they had lower standards than the rest of us, but because they had no money, no resources, and no other choice. Well, even if I had seen the truth, would I have been brave enough to speak up for the Okies within my community and risk unpopularity? Probably not. I'm lucky now that my education outlook is one of tolerance to all people, with a perspective that looks past fear in search of understanding. And I'm lucky that these opinions are supported by a large enough faction of society to grant me acceptance. The struggle of the 1930s Okies is a sad story that has sadly been repeated time and time again throughout American history. An unwarranted prejudice against groups of humans deemed less worthy. Unfortunately, that too still exists today, and will continue to exist as high emotions run free, and people spread collective ideas that override logic to support each other in uninformed beliefs. Our communities of influence have expanded exponentially in recent history due to advances in transportation and the spreading of information. And while this is overall a good thing for society, our bigger world is much harder on our imperfect brains. In the past, our environment was small and limited, and we were exposed to much less new information. Now, our brains are continuously flooded with fresh concepts, foreign ideas, and wide knowledge of everything that's happening all over the world. Humankind must now struggle to adapt to these changes, and honestly, it's not that easy. No matter how much we might pride ourselves in being rational actors within this marketplace of ideas, navigating in the discordant viewpoints that inundate the complex margins of our diverse world, the constitution of knowledge is a conversation mediated by the institutions, cultures, and social networks that embody our existence. It's a constitution that is heavily reliant upon experts, social norms and rules, a foundation of values, and a shared understanding of the right and wrong ways to construct, share, and consume knowledge. As vast as our communities have become, and wherever we find ourselves landing in these shared belief systems, the approval of our people will always shape our opinions and the way we express them. In his book, The Righteous Mind Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, Jonathan Haidt writes that, quote, people care a great deal more about appearance and reputation than about reality. Our moral thinking is much more like a politician searching for votes than a scientist searching for truth, end quote. Haidt goes on to explain how we are actually, believe it or not, physically rewarded by confirming the beliefs of our chosen communities. When we find information, true or not, that conforms with our belief system, it triggers a hit of dopamine in the brain. Like rats that cannot stop pressing a button, partisans may be simply unable to stop believing weird things, Haidt tells us. Extreme partisanship may literally be addictive. To further confuse our journey of knowledge, we must realize that no matter how hard we try, it is impossible to find information that is completely free of bias. There are, for example, credentialing agencies that certify embodied knowledge, institutions of learning, the scientific method, and other institutional systems by which trust is authenticated and accountability enforced. Yet these institutional stalwarts of knowledge, well, they are themselves political in nature and influenced by the sociocultural stream of thinking that dominates our perceptions of the world. So, what now? If we know we have biases and we know that we have a bias that prevents us from seeing our own biases, and further know that our biases are heavily influenced by our emotions and our community groupthink, can we ever trust ourselves to make rational and well informed decisions? Of course, first of all, we believe in ourselves. If only to go on functioning, we must believe that our natural inclination towards truth and reason will prevail over all else. And many times, it does. Philosopher David Hume challenges the default assumption that our brains will sort through fact and fiction and bring us to the most logical decisions. But he does not deny the utility of reason as a tool for thinking. Rather, in his treatise on human nature, he proposes that reason is more akin to a navigator riding in the passenger seat of our minds, while our moral intuitions and emotions command the driver's seat. The result of various forms of research ultimately suggests that it is not so much the case that reason never prevails, or that it even rarely prevails, but that it does not prevail reliably. So while we often think about truth and facts as a currency of knowledge assembling the mosaic tiles of information into a coherent representation of reality, it's more of an emotional and social process than one of reasoned contemplation. There's no clear answer that will fix the human mind's propensity to distort our thoughts, but I have a suggestion. We need to harness the power of our minds for good rather than evil. And our minds do have power. There is a link from the non-material mind to the material body that is evident in our everyday lives. For instance, when we think about losing a loved one, our blood pressure increases. When we watch someone vomiting, well, we too become nauseous. When we witness another person suffering or experiencing fear, our own pulse begins to race. During times of mental duress, our physical health suffers as our immune system weakens. In fact, our minds have so much power to convince our bodies that they can even kill us. On the extreme level of distorted thoughts, people have died from non-venomous snake bites, merely because they believed they had toxic venom coursing through their veins, and the fear of death literally brought it on. Belief is a very powerful mechanism of the mind, and the best thing that we can do is to understand our ability to control what we believe, and then direct our belief in positive directions, for ourselves and for others. The first step we should all take is to believe in bias. The more that we believe that our personal biases are real, the more that we can recognize and counter them. Now, I know this is much easier said than done, but please, believe in the possibility. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. I'm Sean Sainhart, and you are watching, or perhaps listening, to Coup Save America. Last week, I recorded an extraordinary interview with the internationally best-selling author Barry Nicola, who is an expert in the science of how thoughts become things. Now, I want to apologize in advance for the poor video quality and technical issues towards the end of the interview. As it turns out, I had a terrible headache on that day, and the technicians were constantly adjusting the studio lights that were, well, aggravating it. My video feed also dropped off toward the end, so the last part of this interview will be audio only. I hope that you enjoy this engaging discussion about the power of positive thinking and will keep in mind your biased thinking. Enjoy the interview. And welcome back. Joining me today is a best-selling author, Barry Nicolau. I probably didn't say that right. Always screwing up names, folks. Nicolau. joins us right now. Did I get that right?
You got it spot on, Sean. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, no, thank you so much for joining us. You have written a book.
Yep.
I want you to talk about the book in just a minute, but one of the things that I find fascinating is your expertise in the science of how thoughts become things. Can you
Mm.
explain that a little bit?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for asking. It's a great question. To explain it properly, I'd like to kind of revert back to a very important Einstein quote, if I can, Sean, that kind of
Oh, I
propelled me
love
on this path.
Einstein.
Oh,
I love Einstein.
he was such a great philosopher, aside from his
Oh,
scientific pursuits that he's known for, right? And he asked this question is probably the most popular question that no one knows about that we answer consciously or unconsciously. And Einstein postulated that he said every human being must make this decision, and the question is this: and do you believe that you live in a toxic universe, or do you inherently believe you live in a friendly universe? And the idea of the question is not to give a long-winded, drawn-out answer about toxicity and friendliness and what you see and the divisions in the world that we see every time. The purpose of the question is to reduce your answer to one word, because that one word inherently is what you believe. Now, if you're the kind of toxic kind of person and you look at the world and you give me supporting arguments to support the toxicity, then that's who you are. That's all cool. At least you're honest, right? If you're a friendly kind of person and you cite examples of friendly scenarios that are happening every day that we're not privy to, but they are happening, and that's your position in the world, then you tend to attract those sort of scenarios and circumstances that you are coming from. So creative visualization, in many respects, the law of attraction and how thoughts become things end up forming in our lives based on that answer. So it's really just consider it, and it doesn't matter which side you're on, because you will continually see examples of the truth of what you truly believe. So creative visualization is really important, how thoughts become things. So the science is this: so if you have a pad and pen out, you might want to consider how thoughts become things. So I'd just like you to consider your hand right now, and you look at your hand as matter. And then you take a microscope to your hand, you go to the doctor and you say, well, what's inside? I want to know what's inside matter. And he will say, well, you've got cells inside matter. And then you go further still inside cells and you say, well, what's inside cells? And then he'll say, well, molecules are inside cells. And then you go one further still because you're interested, right? And you want to know what forms this matter that you're, this bodysuit that we're in. And you go inside and, well, Barry, inside molecules is atoms. And this is where it starts to get super cool, Sean. You go inside atoms and you ask yourself the question, you go, well, what's inside that? And what you get is subatomic particles. Now, the coolest thing here
right.
is what's inside subatomic particles, which are these little things called quarks. You can Google them, Quarks. And if you observe a quark under an electron microscope, what you'll see is that the molecular structure of quarks change just through observation, just through the observer
Right.
effect.
Right.
It's wild, Sean, right? And then you
The
ask the
quantum
next
physics, yes.
yes, absolutely, into quantum physics, absolutely. And then you ask yourself, what's the next logical question here? What makes quarks shift dynamic like that? And the only answer I can come up with in all my research is thought. Thought influences quarks, it influences subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, cells, and what we see as matter. So if you're the kind of person that says, Barry, I never find a car spot. I never find a car spot. Car spots are elusive for me. I'll drive around for hours trying to find a car spot. Then you're not going to find one, because inherently that's a subconscious belief that you've carried forward, right? If you're the kind of
Right.
person that says, I always get lucky, then all of a sudden you get quote unquote lucky in some circumstances. The right people, circumstances, situations find you, and people start to go, what on earth is going on with you? How have you gotten this fortunate, or how have you gotten this misfortunate in some respects? And what I've developed and what I've understood is that we've got much more influence over our futures and over the direction of our futures than we think we do. It's not as random as we might believe it is. So we've got a great deal of influence, and that's what I've explored in my new book and in my previous book.
Yeah, people are going to have a hard time, I think, believing,
Yeah.
understanding this because
Mm, mm, mm,
um, a team of sociologists
mhm,
back in the 70s, I think, did a study.
mm, mm,
They went into a nursing home and they had two groups. One group they had gave instructions to try to make more decisions,
mhm,
mindfulness basically.
mm, mm,
And they
mm,
gave them
mm,
a plant, a house plant. Well, they said choose a house plant, choose where to put it,
mm,
and choose how often and when to water it.
mm,
And the other group, of course, they gave a house plant to, and they had the nursing staff take care of it. And the end result was that mindfulness in
mm,
the first group, they were healthier. Only half had
mm,
died in
mm,
contrast to the other group. And so
mm,
what the researchers concluded was this mind body connection
mm,
that sort of exists is
mm.
phenomenal because you can literally will yourself better health. Um,
Ab
and
Absolutely.
so there's a lot of science behind what you were saying, what your premise is.
Absolutely, and I think if you don't know the science, you're either, and I don't mean to sound horrible here, but you're either ignorant to it or arrogant to it. You know, if you start to look into and what's really funny, Einstein's teacher was a man called Max Planck. He won the Nobel Prize in 1918 for physics, right? So we're talking 100 years ago, right? So this is how slow sometimes humanity catches up. And he talked about, and I've got a quote from him. It's really really great. How the solar system of an atom comes together, and he talks about an intelligent creator, and that intelligence is in everything. It's in our bodies, it's on the
Right.
earth, it's in the trees, it's in the air, it's everything. It helps everything grow. And if we can tap into that intelligence, and this is 100 years ago, right? If we can tap into that intelligence, all of a sudden, the diseases and the things that we feel in Western medicine, that this is the solution, you have cancer, chemo is the answer, or whatever it is, that there are other avenues over the last, 300,000 years that Western medicine doesn't necessarily, this is going to sound political, but doesn't profit from. And we're in a situation where this is the route for healing, and we're and we believe it because at the end of the day, we've seen people heal from chemo. But I'll be completely honest with you, Sean. I've seen people heal from stage 4 cancer naturally. They've changed their diet, they've changed their exercise, they've changed their mindset. All of a sudden, they start reversing these. And I've met these people. They're not like they're just on the internet and I don't know who they are and they're just elusive. But
Right.
I've met them, I've shaken their hands, and I've said, "How have you done it?" And they've said, "Barry, I've radically changed my life and I've reversed the cancer." So that's just one example in cancer, for example. And everyone should just take the best advice that they can from their doctor and their physicians. But all I'm open to is other ways of healing here. Like the body and the mind is such a strong connection. Like whatever you think is possible, you will see as probable. And if anything you see as probable, you will see in some form in reality. So it ends up being this: can you believe that you can heal? Can you believe that this can change? Can you believe? And then the world, then it shows you the tangible expressions of what that belief represents for you inside. It's wild.
Have you have you heard of an island in Greece where people the
Live?
lifespan is so
Yeah, yeah,
much long?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
on this island
Yeah.
that have been given diagnoses like 20 years ago, like you've got
Yeah.
months to live, you've got cancer.
Yeah.
And on this island,
Mm,
and again, it's
mm,
not just about the power of thought, but it is
mm,
about
mm,
their lifestyle, um, organic food. Of course, they don't
mm,
use the word organic; it's just normal
mm,
to them.
mm, mm.
Um, it is fascinating, this idea that our thoughts have so much power.
They so do. I think they call it the blue zone. There's a few islands in the Mediterranean that they've tracked the longevity of years, and I think, not sure what European body has called it the blue zone, but they've looked at diet and state of mind. And I think one of the big factors in what's making them live is they don't have as much stress as what we do in the Western world,
Right.
and they also take things like I remember my grandmother. I'm Greek. I'm of Greek descent, right? And to give you an idea of how my grandmother thought, when she had a problem or a challenge, my mum used to tell me that she used to sing. I know this sounds kind of silly, but whenever my she would sing in the kitchen, cutting a cucumber or whatever it was, she was in a place where she was down, and mum knew because she's like, Barry, she's singing, she must be thinking about problems. But instead of getting stressed about the problem, or instead of getting really kind of get your cortisone levels up and get the stress through your body, she used to default to her favorite song, and she used to just hum it as she was. And I'm not saying that's the answer to our problems, but isn't it interesting how they live this long life because they've got these simple routines that they put into place and you know what, Sean? Life's not that complicated. You give your body a healthy food, you do your exercise, and you keep this full of good stuff, and all of a sudden, you tend to gravitate towards a healthier, longer life. So it's incredible. Like it's just something that want to learn more about myself. Mm,
Absolutely. And, it's just funny because Einstein, when I was a
mm,
teenager,
mm.
most of my friends had posters of pinup girls or whatever. I had Einstein and Tesla. Nikola Tesla.
I love it.
Um, that's what got me into science.
Yeah,
Reading those two
yeah,
since childhood,
yeah.
and I was a weird child, obviously, because again, I was reading books about Einstein and Tesla,
Mm,
um,
mm,
and Einstein is so misunderstood, with Tesla too,
mm,
for that matter, even
mm,
today.
mm, mm, mm.
Um, and they were so far ahead of their time,
That
and
they were. Mm,
and with Einstein, when you mention his intelligent design, a lot of people
mm,
misinterpret that.
mm,
And
mm,
they're like, no,
mm,
no, no, he's talking about a god, right?
mm,
And
mm,
I didn't get that really. I mean, I got
mm,
exactly what you described. He saw
mm,
there is intelligent design in all things, and
mm, mm,
the
mm,
power of the mind. Um,
mm.
what do you think he would make of quantum physics today?
I can I be honest? I think Einstein didn't even know what he stumbled across. I think there is so much in. I think he started it. I think he was the spark, and the fire is now spread. But I think I think he called it spooky action at a distance, right? When there was
Yeah, well, it is.
yeah, that's how he explained. I mean, the most scientific mind in history, and he explained it in such layman terms: spooky action at a distance, because there wasn't terminology to explain what was actually going on here when two protons kind of acted the same way, light years apart. And you think, so how did this actually work? How is this working? It doesn't make sense to me. And I think for me, what I take away from Einstein and great minds like Tesla as well is that they were pioneering into new critical thinking areas that led us today, say 100 years later, into exploring what those, and with the best minds of today, exploring what those concepts actually mean. And the science of how thoughts become things is probably at the frontier, as far as I'm concerned, of are we responsible for a lot more of our realities than we think we are? Like most people who have bad luck will say to me, oh, it's all random, Barry. It's all random. Everything's completely random. And then the woman that said that to me in my latest audience in Sydney, Australia here, I said, well, was it random that you came to this seminar today? She goes, no, I caught the train and I came in. So I said, you had intention to come here. So why can't you have intention about the food that you eat or the sleep that you get? Or the books that you read, or the family members that are toxic to you, or the friends that don't necessarily wish you well. Like, why can't intention kind of come across everything? Why is everything so random? And yeah, I get it. There are babies dying at 5 years old, and there are bad people living till 100. And how do you make sense of that sort of thing? But there are things that are out of my control, Sean, and there are things that are within my control. So what I've learned to do is to control the controllables, if that makes sense. And then
Yeah,
if I've got
explain that a
full
little bit more, though.
yeah, yeah. So a lot of people actually feel that, and I think a lot of our energy and worry goes into scenarios that we cannot affect on a mass scale. So what I say to people, if they want change, or if they want to, if they see something political, or if they see something within their families, or if you've got to first be that change within yourself. You can't just point the finger and say, well, there's the problem. That guy, the person in the White House, that's the problem. And we need to. And you're right. You might be right. You might be wrong. I don't know. But most people follow people that are the change that they are looking for themselves. So if I want to know if my thoughts become things, I look at pioneers in the world, researchers, university professors that are at the leading front of that. And if I've got my world, like Sean, I'm speaking to you right now, and this is something that I can control, I make sure that I control that sphere of influence as much as possible. And anything out of that bubble that I put my energy towards, that I get stressed about, I have to let go. Because if I seriously worry about things that I can't change, I could be losing a friend that I could be helping back from suicide. Like my energy is being spent in the wrong direction. And I'm the biggest believer. Money is no longer the currency. Energy is the currency, and how you spend your energy is of primary importance. And energy is associated with time because you're not going to have forever to live. So, how you spend your energy and your time is what's going to make a difference in yourself and the world. Money will come, money will go, right? So
Yeah.
it's really important for me anyway, the way I live my life, and the next book that I'm writing is to make sure that we understand that energy is the currency. How you spend that is what's going to determine what sort of life you're going to live.
Yeah,
Yep.
I have to be honest. I
Mm.
struggle um, with the state of the world. I take it very
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes I feel empathy overload,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I do tend to be more of a negative thinker, and I want
Mm.
to change that. Um, what are some tips on
Yeah.
how? Because in the world that we're living today, it is very easy to adopt a negative mindset. How do we kind
Well,
of stray away from that?
okay. So the first question I'd be asking myself is, are there good scenarios in the world that are happening right now that I'm not privy to? And I don't know about most people listening or yourself, Sean, but I say, hell yeah. There would be things that I don't know. There are kidney transplants. There are marriages getting back together. There are people that are loaning people money that are saying, I don't want this money back. I'm just giving it to you to help you along. There are that's happening on a hundreds of thousands of people scale that we're not privy to. So I guess what we're looking at when we look at the state of the world is we're looking through the keyhole of our pain and we're saying that's the world. Now, you tell me, if you look through a keyhole of a door, do you see the whole room? No. You see the
Right.
dimensions of the keyhole, and you think you've got a pretty good grasp of what's inside that room, and you don't. I don't. No one does. So, the first thing I do is I'm saying, well, could there be things that you're missing in the world that would perhaps balance the negativity? You know, you might not be sitting at 90% negative, 10% good. All of a sudden now you're sitting at 65% negative, 35% good. You've shifted the balance a little bit. And that's all it takes. And all of a sudden the mind goes, well, I'll buy that. I think there are good things happening. I think there are people in political circles that actually want the best for their people, but they're in a system of corruption
Yeah.
and they're trying to do their best in that. Yeah, I can buy that. I think that that's true. In some, I don't know who those people are, but I think it's true that there are
I
those
have a
people.
list I can give to you after.
I love it. So these people exist, right? So the
Right.
mind goes, okay, I can buy that. There are good things happening right now in the world. And then to take it one step further is I say, can I be that person that does quiet, anonymous, I don't know, I guess little things of goodness to help people along, and can I be the example of that? The answer is yes, I can. And it's not, the world's not necessarily going in a bad place holistically overall, but what we're seeing is a few views that are shouting really loudly, and we're saying, well, that's the state of the world. It's not. It's a few crazy men with a lot of power. You know, like if you look
Yeah.
at what's happening in Ukraine and Russia right now, it's one guy. You know, if that one guy turned around and said, well, no, we're going to stop this. Sorry, we've made a mistake. All right. 70,000 of our countrymen have died in this stupidity, honestly. And all of a sudden, you know, like, what do? You just got to keep doing good. And you got to keep looking after your family, and you got to keep being the light for others as much as possible. So yeah, everyone's different, but that's how I view it.
No, I love that.
Mm,
Yeah. Well, and you brought something up too, the keyhole
mm,
theory.
mm, mm.
How much does the mainstream media play into that? Because So
Huge.
much of our world view is based upon the news, which is another
Mm,
for-profit kind of entity that's designed,
mm,
I think, to give
mm.
us the worst.
Yeah, you know what? You're right, but you know what, Sean? We have choice who to listen to.
Yeah.
We have that choice, man. If you're going to sit there, like, I'll give you an example. One family member of mine, when COVID was in its thickest, like say 2 years ago, and every news channel had COVID coverage after COVID coverage after COVID coverage, and the numbers were the same from 10 minutes ago, but we just wanted more and more and more. Man, that's a choice. Like for me, I look at negative news and bad news. Give it to me in bullet points. I don't want to read novels of it. And
Right.
some people are habitually reading novels of it and then seeing the wrong in it and then basing a life of negativity and hardship and maybe perhaps shrinking the good in themselves, the potential for good, in helping others because we're so focused on the injustices. When to counteract that, you can't be on the side of injustice. So you've got to, and this is the big thing. I'd love people to write this down. I want to know what you're for. I don't want to know just what you're against. They're two very different things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, they are, man. Like when I coach people one on one, right? And they say, "Well, I don't want this, and I don't want to be broke, and I don't want cancer, and I don't want my marriage to." I'm like, "You've just told me what you don't want. What are you for? What do you want?" And they're like, "I don't know." Because we've been habitually talking about what we do not want. Now, if you look at quantum physics, we go back to our earlier conversation and we look at the crux of what we say literally, I don't want cancer. Now, the vibration and the frequency in that statement is not I don't want. The frequency and the vibration is cancer. I don't want to be broke. I hate being broke. I've got friends that are broke. They've got no money in the bank. I don't want to be broke, 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 broke. The vibration, the frequency is I don't have any money. It's broke, right? So how do you reword? How do you start to reinvigorate the mind into what we're for? Cancer. I look forward to having a long, healthy life. I look forward to that. I'm going to help millions of people on my journey. That's going to feel so good for me. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the day I'm financially free. That's going to feel really good. That's going to give me the time to be on all these great podcasts and help the world. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be so cool for me. Like, I'm really looking forward to the world being in a better place. I'm really looking forward to happier stories. I'm going to be part of that journey. I'm going to start with myself and see where it goes. This is going to feel really good for me. And you start speaking down that road rather than looking at the problem and joining the problem, even though you don't feel part of the problem, you feel like you're part of the solution. But what you're actually doing is you're feeding the wolf that you don't want to feed, inadvertently so. So you've got to figure out if you don't like the corruption. For example, we're talking politics, right? If you don't like the corruption, how can you speak up for honesty and make honesty your foundational principle on how you speak to people? And all of a sudden, you'll affect one person, 5 people, 10 people, and well, Barry's known for honesty. I really like that. If Barry ever runs for office or if Barry ever wants to get into government, that's one of his traits that I love. All of a sudden, you are a proponent for that. You're not so much against the corruption because you are naturally. If you're for
Right.
honesty, you're against corruption, right? So it's kind of like, tell me what you're for, and I'll show you the future you're going to have. Tell me what you're against, and I'll show you the future you're going to have. It's just don't let yourself, as much as possible, don't let yourself be manipulated into thinking that it's all bad because it's not. Sean, there is so much good happening in the world right now, and I've got 2 daughters, I'll tell you, and the way that I'm bringing them up is full about gratitude and love and gratitude for what we've got without necessarily anything else happening tomorrow. So yeah, that's how I live my life, and it's so far it works for me.
Is that the default of humanity in a sense, though?
Yeah,
If you go back to
yeah,
like the hunter gatherer societies, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
generosity, gratitude, it seems as though somewhere along the way we've strayed from where we started from.
yeah.
Um, what do you think has impacted that? It impacted the way that we think.
I think we're much more reactive to fear than we are to love. And I think biologically that's the way. I mean, the hunter-gatherer scenario is very, it's a proponent of that thinking because, if you're running away from some sort of freaking animal, like you don't, you want to survive, right? So the fear really kicks in, and the cortisol levels go up, and you're stressed for 5 minutes, and you run and you try to save your life. But what I end up finding is that love, joy, end up being passive emotions in some respect. So we obviously pay more attention to active emotions, fear, negativity. We get really angry at certain things.
Yeah.
What I've discovered, Sean, is this. Every human being on the planet, as a base program, if you think about your computer and there's like a base program, a base operating system, right? And everything is bolted onto that, like apps and software is bolted onto a base program. The base program in human beings is love. Now, anything you add to love, like you get a clean glass of water, it's a clean glass of water, you can drink it. If you add a drop of ink to it, you can't drink it anymore. It becomes blue, yes? If you add frustration to love, if you add disappointment to love over and over and over again, you get anger. Now, anger, if you look at the actual emotion of anger and people getting really angry at themselves, at their governments, or whatever it is, anger is disappointed love. Love that's
Hmm.
been disappointed over and over and over again, and you get angry because what you're actually angry about, you care about. That's why you're angry, because you care about the outcome, right? So I look at myself and I'm like, right, how do I bring myself back to that base emotion? How do I not let people offend me? How do I be less judgmental of others? Because that means I'm less judgmental of myself and the mistakes that I'm making. How do I not live in self loathing and self hate for years and years and years because I've made a mistake? And what we're finding is that there's a lot of angry people that haven't necessarily looked inwards and that are blaming their internal frustrations on the external world because what they're seeing is what they don't like what they're seeing. But hey, let's how about we get our own house in order? And I know this is going to kind of be a bit perplexing for some people, but make sure that we've forgiven ourselves for anything that we've felt that we've done in the past, that we show ourselves the love that we want to see in the world. Like we start from ourselves and then we work outwards. And I keep saying, Sean, anyone that goes to the gym that wants to get fit, listen to this is a really important analogy to consider. If you go to the gym and you want to get fit, you never see the physical changes in your body until you feel them first. Like you'll get up off the floor quicker, you'll climb the stairs without puffing, you'll run a mile and you think, oh, but your body doesn't look any different. It looks the
Right.
same. You take your clothes off, you're still the same guy, right? But everything starts from how you feel inside first. And then the body goes, oh, you feel different. Internally, you start changing. Then eventually you keep at it, you see the the physical outside represent how you're feeling inside. So why wouldn't it work the same way with society? If we can go inside as individuals and try to forgive and try to love and try to understand ourselves on a deeper level, then won't that eventually affect society as a whole? Like it has to. So we're at a stage where for me, I'm angry at things. Absolutely. I dislike certain people. Absolutely. Am I doing anything wrong? Yeah. I've got to fix that first to make sure that my external world becomes a representation of my internal world. So yeah.
How do you take that philosophy, that
Mm,
mindset,
mm,
and
mm,
translate that into communicating with other people? Because that's a very
mhm.
difficult thing to do because a lot of people
Absolutely.
are stuck in a mindset, and a lot of people don't want to hear certain
Mm.
things.
So this is going to sound horrible. I've stopped arguing with fools. If someone comes to me, Sean, and says 2 and 2 is 5, I'll agree with them. And it's not that I'm being ignorant or arrogant to it. What I've decided to do is to spend my energy and my time with the people that are interested to know more. And if I come across someone at a gathering or whatever, and I start speaking about what I'm interested in, and I know that they're not at the right level to take on or absorb any of it, I don't necessarily push that conversation forward. Let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about the car spot. Let's talk about something that won't increase the tension. So I look
Right.
at that and I'm like, okay, so people that come to me now that ask questions, I take to the next level, right? And I'm like, well, this is what I'm thinking. You might want to absorb it, you might not. It's completely up to you. But if they've come to me, I know that they're interested. And if it's me trying to exert my knowledge and my love and my passion on other people, they're not ready for that. That's okay. One thing I do know is that when I leave that room, everyone has a greater understanding. If it's a seminar, and let's just say hypothetically, Sean, that at level 10, everyone makes a life changing choice in their life, right? At level
Right.
10. I don't know if I'm speaking to threes, fours, zeros, twos, sixes, nines. I don't know. I'm hoping I'm speaking to eights and nines, but I don't know, right? But what I do know for sure is that when I leave that room, everyone goes up a number. The threes go to fours, the sixes go to sevens, the nines make decisions, the zeros hopefully go to ones, because that's the whole idea, is that if you've got knowledge, if you're like Tesla, or if you're like Einstein or Gandhi or Christ, big spiritual and intelligent masters of the last 2-3 thousand years, and not everyone's going to get what they're talking about, but the people
Right.
that are at that level will get it, and then you start to influence your believers. So it's really cool in that respect for me anyway, because the circle's tight and then your believers build other believers. It's awesome.
But if you're trying to
Mm,
advance change, for instance,
mm,
and you're
mm,
trying to convince other people, not even convince, but having a
mm,
dialogue with people, because right
mm,
now in the political environment,
mm, mm.
dialogue is so difficult. I mean, we are so divided,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
so frustrating because there's like a culture war going on.
Mm,
You're either on the right, you're on the left,
yeah,
and it seems like, okay, but there's a middle point where we're all
there is.
human.
Yeah, yeah.
And how do we get back to that point where we're not hating each other?
I- I'll tell you the best analogy that I've come up with, and it's in my new book, right? And this is a really good segue to consider this. I've looked at the four largest religions in the world in my new book. So I've looked at Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Now, those four religions currently account for 83% of the planet, just to give you an idea. Those four religions, right? And I think to myself, okay, when I was writing the book, I wonder if I can dive into the literature of all those religions and find commonality. And you know what I found, Sean? I found that gratitude was a core pillar in every one of the texts of those four religions. Gratitude. So if you, for example, had a Buddhist monk, had a Christian priest, had an Islamic cleric, and had a Hindu holy man sitting around a table, and you walked in, Sean, and you threw gratitude on the table as a conversation starter, all four people would nod their heads and go, "We all agree on that." So it's the same with politics. If you can throw a piece of commonality on the table to say, listen, we've got such divisions, you believe this and I believe that. Is there anything that we both believe in here? And if you can start from a base of commonality, all of a sudden you can build framework on that and say, well, if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat or whatever it is, you know what, you have to give a bit because they have to give a bit, and let's both give a bit
Right.
so we can find middle ground. So the religions conversation for me ended up being an eye opener, because you need to find, whether it's religions, politics, or just two people that are not getting on, as a negotiator, what do they agree on? What's the one thing? And for me, I just look at what is the one thing we all want, regardless of our persuasions, is we all want more love and we all want to give more love. So I'm not saying you should throw love on the table every time in a political scenario, but what's the one thing you can do to say, well, they both won't disagree on this. And then and it might be a process of weeks and months and years to get them back to I don't know, but just keep filling the hole with commonality. Like keep talking about, what do we have in common here? Is there anything? And then all of a sudden, what tends to happen, I think, the extremists on both sides, be it a view or a party or whoever it is, start to kind of soften their approach. And all of a sudden, there's 10 things that we have in common that we didn't view before, because we're so angry at each other. It's like the keyhole, right? We're looking through the keyhole of why they're wrong and why we're right, and we have to tell them why they're wrong. All
Hmm.
of a sudden, they're both looking through damn keyholes, and everyone's getting angry in between. So for me, it's like, how do you find the centerpiece that everyone can kind of agree on, and then build on that.
What are some
Yeah.
of the experiences that you've had in helping people transform? What have you seen, and how
Yeah.
is that?
So it's really important. So what I've done is I've developed a when I sit down with someone, be it a company, I'm doing a lot of work now. Would you believe, in corporates for us in Australia, like law firms, insane like law firms. I wanting to understand the energy behind thought and what they're doing. So it's really wild here. What's going on? But what I've done is I've developed like a 6 step area that I'm happy to share with you, Sean, that helps people get from where they are to where they want to be. And it's if you
Okay.
have a pad and pen out, please take a pad and pen out if you're listening, because you can just jot these down and work on them after the podcast. The first thing you need to do is you need to identify what you want. So, what we said before, identify your desire. Now, I don't want you to say to me you just want to be happy, because it's too broad. You got to have a metric. What does happiness actually mean for you, right? The
Right.
second step is, okay, you've defined your desire now. Barry, I want that. Okay, that's great. The second step is to see the possibility of that in your life. So you might not see it right now because you don't have it, right? So I look in the world. Does this exist in the world right now? Let's just take financial as an example. Are there people earning $1 million a year? Let's just put a figure out there. I want to earn $1 million a year. That's my desire. Are there people now earning that sort of money? Yes, there would be. So what you're saying is it exists. I'm like, yeah, you're saying, yeah, Barry, it exists. Okay, so that's great. So all of a sudden now we're getting the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain working in tandem rather than just the right hemisphere doing whatever it wants, right? So now, okay, Barry, it exists. And here are the people. I'm going to research the people online who are making this sort of money. Now it's true. The third area is where we get into quantum physics. And I need you to feel the possibility of that being in your reality right now. So let's just close your eyes for a few seconds. And I usually do this every day and every night, every morning and night. And I look at, what would this feel like in my bones when this is true for me? Who would I be helping? Would I give my parents some money? Would I help that charity? Would I start my own political party? Where would I be living? I'd be living in that area. I'd be driving that car. I'd be helping out that person. This feels really good. Wow, this is in my bones. The reason that step 3 is important is because the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between a real event and an imagined event felt vividly. It doesn't know the difference. So, what you're doing is you're making a subconscious impression that this is a real thing for you right now. The subconscious mind then looks for examples in the world to match that. And this is where thoughts start attracting back to you the scenarios that you really want. So the third area is to feel the possibility of that reality already in your life. The fourth area is really difficult to do, but it's possible, which is to cut out the toxicity that currently exists in your life. Now, you can do the first 3 steps really well, but if you leave toxicity at its current level in your life, you're treading water. You're not moving. And when I say toxicity, I'm not just talking about people and political parties. I'm talking about, do you get enough sleep? And are you eating right? And have you got the right friends around you? And like self-care tips that enables you to think right with clarity and go forward in your life. Like, do you identify toxicity? Right. So once you identify the toxicity, it could be a friend or a family member or something you're doing. It's very important to take steps away from that. You might not want to cut it off completely at that instant because it might mean something to you, right? We're attached to our
Right.
toxicity sometimes. So what I do is I gravitate towards the people that make me feel good. The people that lift me up, that light me up inside. Barry, you're doing such amazing things. I want to support you. How can I help you? This It feels great. You're changing the world in your own way. This feels Those people, I'm all in. But if someone's going to come to me and cast doubt and suspicion and blame and negativity, I just gravitate away. And all of a sudden they end up falling off. That's the fourth area. The fifth area is another area that's a little bit difficult to do, but it's necessary. You've got to be able to release the timing of whatever you want happening in your life. Because what we end up doing logically is we want to force change through. Now, I don't know about you, Sean. Every time I force something with gusto, it's been temporary success. It hasn't been long term success.
Right.
Anything that's come to me intentionally and on time, it's lasted forever for me. And I think it's a universal law that we're not really aware of, right? So if you want something and you choke it by saying it has to happen now, it has to happen now, it has to happen now, what you're really saying is, I don't have it, I don't have it, I don't have it, which is a fear-based control mechanism that is ruining your first 4 steps. So it's very important to work towards what you want, but release the fruition of it, release the timing of it to something with an aerial view of your life. And the way that I know this is true is if you look at all the beautiful moments in your life, just consider the last 20 years and look at all the beautiful moments you've had in your life and ask yourself if they've been perfectly timed. And I don't know anyone that's listening. Perfectly timed, beautiful moments. You're like, that's happened at the perfect time for me. How did they even know that that's meant that friendship, that person that's walked into my life, it's happened at the time that I needed them most. Like, how did that happen? And I've had this trust-based understanding moving forward that I'm working towards what I want, but I'm not going to choke it by thinking that I know best, because I don't.
Right.
Sean, I think I do, but I don't. And because I don't know what's around every corner, and none of us do. So that we move forward with our intentions, and then we trust. And look at kids. Kids. My 5-year-old wanted a sugar cookie before she went to bed last night, and I said no, and she absolutely had the biggest tantrum. She went to bed without a dinner because I know that the timing isn't right. And as her father, I'm not putting her to bed with high sugar levels, right? The next
Right.
morning, right. So she trusts the timing to a higher power. Now, according to Grace, my little 5-year-old, I had no idea what I was doing, but she has no idea about sugar. She has no idea about going to bed. She has no idea that her mum and I need to speak and talk about the house and the bills and whatever we're talking about. She's not privy to that, but she only knows that the cookie is there and daddy's saying no. Well, isn't it the same with adults? What changes? Nothing. When we want the cookie and we don't get it when we think we deserve it, and we think that something out there is withholding it from us, there is a grander plan we're not aware of. And that's something that I've learned to trust. So for me, it's the same thing. So, so excuse me. So I've looked at it as, if I don't have it right now, there's a plan. And I am not going to choke it with doubting that. I've learned to have that trust-based understanding, um, and move forward with it. So it's something that I try to work with. The last area, the 6th area, is to embrace your new reality. So once you've achieved what you want to achieve, and once you've gotten there, and you're on top of the mountain, and you're like, wow, I can't believe I've affected this change, and I can't believe I've done this. It's your job to get bigger. It's your job, because it's the same energy, Sean. It's the same energy that moves a pebble, that moves a mountain. It only looks different in our minds. Energetically, it is the same. Are you a Star Wars fan by any chance?
No, no.
All right.
I-
If you are, there's an episode that I could relate to, but there's a really great scene with Luke moving stones with the Force. Um, you got to know that if it's the same energy that moves something small, that moves something big. So there's no difference. It only looks different from us, from a physicality point of view. A mountain is much bigger
right.
than a pebble, right? But energetically wise, it is just coming back to belief. And I don't want to quote scripture, but at the end of the day, there was this saying that Christ said, um, was it, if you have the faith of a grain of a mustard seed, you will say to that mountain, move from here to there, and it will move for you. I think it was Matthew 17:20. And what he was alluding to wasn't about the mountain or the mustard seed. What he was saying is that, do you believe that this is possible for you? And if you do, in your heart of hearts, not up here, but here, you believe in your chest that this is a true thing, it's a knowing, the physicality of the world will catch up to match that belief. But it can't be when people say they're fine and you know that they're not fine. It's like we can't manipulate the universe in that way. The universe will give you more of what you mean, not so much what you say, because what we say and what we mean can obviously be different. So
Right.
what you mean to say, that's what you get back of. You get back. You don't get what you say. So a lot of people that say, I want a car and I want to be rich and I want to be that, and they don't believe that it's possible for them, then that's the vibration that they're putting out, that they don't believe it's possible for them. So got to get to a place where what you say and what you mean are at the same level. And you mean what you say and you say what you mean, and you are who you are, and your lovers will love you and your haters will leave you, and that's all fine. but you are a walking interpretation of manifestation. So I think that that's a beautiful thing to be, because there's no disparity in you. It's truth. It's just ultimate truth. And then other people will say to you, Sean, how have you done that? And you'll just say the same thing that everyone else does. I've just changed what goes on up here, and I'm being true to me, and I've seen the tangible expressions of what that represents for me. And guess what? You can do it too if you want. Like, it's not withholding anything. It's just, you just got to just align this with what you really want, and then the world matches it. It's so cool to consider life in that way. It's so awesome.
Now, your first book,
Yeah,
you mentioned that you kind of got the concept for a lot of this while
yeah,
visiting a cemetery.
yeah, yeah.
I want to explore that further because that's just fascinating to me. Is that when you
Yeah.
kind of came up with this whole philosophy as well, or was that just your idea for the book?
I'm going to use the word spooky because Einstein used it. So I'm coming from a scientific base here because Einstein used it. It was 2015 for me, and I was at a. I'll give you the short version of this story because I can go for days. But I was early for an appointment. I got a call in the car saying, "Barry, I'm late." The best thing to describe what happened is my car steered itself into this beautifully appointed cemetery in the northwestern suburbs of Sydney. I don't know anyone that's buried there. I wanted to kill the hour. Pardon the pun. I just walked in. I just got out of my car. I started walking among these gravestones, feeling utterly depressed, unfulfilled, self-loathing. Didn't know what my life was going for. I was earning money. I was supporting my family, but I just felt empty. There was a yearning in me as a man that I wasn't doing what I was meant to be doing. And I leant up against my car as I was about to leave, and there was a moment of I don't know how best to describe this. It was a moment of utter vulnerability and clarity that came into my life, and I felt three words that I still can't describe how they came. And at the time, it scared the crap out of me because I've never heard communication at that level before, and it kind of was spooky for me. So I dismissed it. I just thought, this is crazy. Went home, went to my appointment, went home, went to bed that night, and I woke up. And the three words that I heard, by the way, were live your life. And I'm like, not the greatest epiphany. You know, if you want to give me something, give me the lottery numbers, give me something wild. I can really live my life. Um, I woke up at 3 a.m. with the word your like glowing in my head. It was kind of weird, right? And I'm like, I get it. Live your life. Don't try and live a life based on somebody else's opinions, thoughts, and whatever else. And then I thought, what do I love? Like, I never asked myself that question before. What do I love? And then I started to research the people that came from ultimate failure to ultimate success. And I wanted to know how they did it. So I started writing and writing and writing and writing, and everything I wrote just made sense. And it felt like that yearning was coming out of me. It felt like it felt real. And a year later, I had something that looked like chapter headings in a book. And I'm like, I know no one in the publishing industry. I've got no friends that are authors. How does this even work? My wife knows that I've written this crazy 100 words or 100, like no one knows about it because I didn't want to be embarrassed. So how stupid was I, right? Anyway, and then I get this random Facebook message from a publishing house. How does this work, right? We publish books. If you have a manuscript, we'd love to hear from you. And I'm like, well, that's random. How does that work? Got in touch with John, got a great campaign on Amazon, got to #1 in 6 countries, 19 categories on the website, an online course from the book. And this is a trusting that I've since understood since that day, like 7 years ago, is that when you are on the right path, when you are on the path that life has intended for you to live, the green lights happen often and they happen quickly. They happen very, very quickly. If you are consistently finding resistance and red lights continually, and you want to fight those red lights and you want to go forward and force whatever you want to force through, just okay, if you want to do that, you can do that, right? But also look where the green lights are in your life right now, too. And make
Right.
sure that you're pushing those green lights where they need to go, to their maximum of where they need to go as well. Because then that'll give you energy and strength to go forward with the red lights that you keep wanting to push. Now, for me, I don't push red lights anymore because there's so many greens. So I just go forward with the greens, the right people, the circumstances, the situations that find me that I have no idea how these things happen, and I'm leaving it to a higher power to understand that. How do these? I don't know. And all of a sudden, the right podcasts, the right books, the right titles, the right people coming to my life because I'm co-creating. I'm not just thinking that it's just about me because I don't have the aerial view. I've only got the ground view. And you let me know how much can you see from the car as opposed to see from the aeroplane. Now, from the aeroplane, you can see the whole damn city. From the car, you see 500 meters ahead. I've resounded to understanding that I don't know everything and I don't know what's around the next corner. So I'm just going forward with the green and I'm just sussing myself out and going, right, this feels okay. Keep moving forward. This still feels okay. Keep moving. Oh, a red light. Okay. What can I do here? Is there any other green lights that I've missed? Oh, yeah, there's one over there. I'll see where that goes. All of a sudden, you end up being like a stream. You find the path of least resistance to the river, right? And then that's the way life ends up being. So I'm just looking at where the smaller pebbles are in this stream, and the water is just kind of finding its way
Right.
through, and that works for me. And I think from a philosophy on how to live life holistically, it makes a lot of sense because you think to yourself, you can fight the red lights, man. You can do it for the rest of your life. You can do it after. There'll be red lights after you die, and there'll be red lights after I die. But I'm not going to fight those reds at the expense of the greens. You
Right.
know what I mean?
And that's something that is so hard for a lot of people to do.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's been a struggle for me too, Sean. It's been a philosophy that I've tried to embrace that humanity as a whole is fighting. Like it's like Barry, you, we know everything as a species, and we know this, and we know that, and we should know how things work, and we should. Well, we don't know everything, so yeah, it's pretty cool to actually understand that we don't know everything, and we just go with where we think life should go.
Technical glitch. If you're a regular subscriber to the show, you know that's not unfortunately uncommon. Um, so I want to go ahead and talk about Barry's latest
Mm,
book, um,
mhm.
coming out February 2023. Move the Mountain, Intention, Reset. Barry, tell us about the book. I mean, we've discussed it a little bit in this podcast, but tell us a little bit about what we can expect and how it differs from the, I'm going to say it again, best selling book.
Stop it. uh, what I've decided to do with this new and by the way, I had no idea I was writing this new book. By the way, things come to you, and you have a choice whether to go forward with them or not. I knew I was writing a book. I had no idea what the title was going to be until 2 months ago. It was something that again we get back to this trust based understanding and these trust based scenarios. The book in itself is a continuation of how thoughts do become things, how we can reset our intention. Initially, when I was writing it to my two daughters. It's kind of a not a memoir, but it's kind of a way that if they choose to live this way, that how their father lived, they can embrace it. It's kind of like a how-to manual sort of thing. And then obviously started writing and discovered that it could be great for everyone to have a read who feels aligned with having a read of it. Um, the book in and of itself is about a 200-page read, but what I've decided to do, Sean, in the middle page spread and for the last 100 pages, there are one-page quotes rather than an intense reading dialogue, which is what the first half of the book is. Because sometimes you just need a nugget of wisdom. I find it's just that little bit of, oh yes, yes, that's come to me at the right time. I've understood it. I've embraced it. So you'll flick to the middle of the book and you'll see all these kind of little one-page quotes that you might just want to absorb or add to your life. But the book is all about moving the mountain. It is all about looking at the obstacles in our life that we think that are fixed, that might not be as fixed as we believe that they are. And if we can reset our intention and looking at our subconscious mind and how thoughts do become things, that we've got a lot of sway over the future that we want to live. So the book's basically a how-to manual on the science of creative visualization, and also looking at brain frequencies and when the best time is to consider the future that we want. So there's a lot of science in it as well. We talk about Einstein and a few other things. So it's exciting.
Would you come back after the book is released and I've read it so that we can talk about the new book?
Absolutely, I'd be honored to. It's beautiful to be in this space with you, Sean. It's great.
Thank you. Yeah, and I apologize for the tech problems, and
That's all good.
I've been a little off my game too because I've just had this headache again today, and it just I want to visualize that gone. I've been working on doing that.
Well, if I was your coach, I'd just say, hey, were there any times where you didn't have a headache? And you're going to say yes. I'm going to say, well, focus on the times when you didn't, and just don't pay attention to it, and it'll go off its own accord.
Well, I'm good. Believe me, I'm going to work on doing that because what I mean, the shots I take are not really helping.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also wanted to say the 11 Master
Mm,
Secrets to Business Success and Personal Fulfillment, your first book.
mm, mm-hmm,
Um, I want people to forget about the business success part of that are
mm-hmm,
listening
mm-hmm,
to this and
mm-hmm,
focus on
mm-hmm.
the personal fulfillment
Yeah, well, yeah.
because this is not necessarily I think when I first saw the book, I thought, oh, this is going to be more of a
Business scenario,
um,
money.
right business scenario,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep.
And that's not the case at all. I mean, this book,
No.
and I love how you start too.
Mm.
When you talked about the first seminar
Oh, yes.
that you
The
did,
embarrassing first seminar. Very
and
embarrassing.
um, I misread that initially, and I thought, oh, um, a bunch of people did show up after, and then I reread it,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh no, he's saying, can you just share that story? Because I mean that I
Yeah.
think highlights exactly what you're talking about. Because I would have
Yes.
just been utterly defeated by that. I
Yeah.
think.
Well, I was for a whole 10 minutes. So for those that haven't read the book, a very quick synopsis of what actually happened. I had my first. I got this book live. The 11 Master Secrets was published on Amazon. We hit number one, and then I was being asked to appear at a few seminar events, like trade shows and what have you, and just to talk on inspiration and economic freedom and fulfillment and personal fulfillment. And as I was going, I woke up in the morning on the day of the seminar, and there was like 5,000 people at this show. And I'm like, it's going to be a great day. I'm starting in the personal development field. I've got a book out there. And I go into my seminar room and expecting to see, like maybe 15, 20, 30, 40 people there, hopefully 100, because the organizers rang me and said, Barry, you're going to have a sold out session. And I'm like, great. And I walk into the room 5 minutes before I was due to speak. And there was one guy sitting in the audience. He was a Chinese guy, and he was eating yogurt. And I can tell you the flavor of the yogurt. That's how specific it was for me. And I got up on stage looking at 99 empty seats and one guy. And I think what added insult to injury was that he wasn't there for me. He was there to get his lunch. So I'm like, so the one guy that's shown up is not even here specifically. He's here by complete random accident. Anyway, and that was the beginning of my lesson, because I got really emotional. I don't care how this sounds, because I go like, you set me up. I'm speaking to the universe and to God. I'm like, you set me up for these beautiful scenarios, and then you give me like one Asian guy, Chinese guy eating yogurt. Like, what the hell, man? Like, what's going on here, right? So I was closing down my laptop. I was opening my bag, and I was about to put my laptop in, and I was just really angry, really angry. Again, disappointed love, right? I was angry, and I was angry, and I was angry. So as I put my laptop in the bag and zipped my bag up, something said, "Just start speaking." Just start, and who cares if it's yogurt man or if it's empty seats? Just start speaking. I would have looked like a lunatic if that guy left, because I'm speaking to no one, right? So so I start speaking about what I love, and the tools of my first book. And three people walked in and sat next to Yogurt Man. I keep calling him Yogurt Man. And all of a sudden there was four in the crowd now. So I'm like, oh, well, four's better than nothing, right? Four's better than one. And all of a sudden, four more people started walking out. I had eight. And I'm like, oh, eight sounds great. Eight's huge. Like, it's massive for me. I had no one. Now I've got eight, or I got one. Now I've got eight. And then all of a sudden, an hour later, to cut a long story short, I had like 117 people in the room. And it's not to really impress anyone to kind of go on their path, but I guess it impressed upon me that when you are on your path, regardless of your size of impact, that you should move forward on that path regardless. And if it's you speaking on your soapbox to the wilderness, don't care. Just stand in your power and say what you want to say, and all of a sudden the believers joined. But it was very scary because I was on the brink, Sean, of walking. And if I walked out, I could have. I promise you, I'll be the guy today talking about how life's not fair. The world's a toxic place, and the world's against me because I tried this thing once, and there was one guy in the audience, and I said, "Screw it! I'm not going to stay here and talk to Yogurt Man. I'm not going to stay here and speak to one guy. This is embarrassing, right?" So it's kind of like, how do you transcend your embarrassment? How do you transcend any feelings of inadequacy? And how do you transcend any feelings of lack of self-worth and just speak your truth, man? Just get up there and speak what you're passionate about. And what you'll find is that you're speaking to the inside or into the part of people that is also quite passionate about what you're passionate about. They just don't know you exist yet.
Exactly.
So it was a wild scenario. It was embarrassing at the beginning though, because I nearly walked, and it was I don't know. So I stayed.
I think what got me so intrigued about that story is just the fact that I look back and I wonder how many times I walked out of an opportunity because I allowed shame or embarrassment or fear to intervene and take control. And I still struggle with that, right?
Yeah.
I hate to admit it, but I would have been that person that would have just walked out and kind of just felt defeated and given up. And I'm working on changing my outlook. I mean, doing this podcast has given me a whole and I guess that's kind of what you're talking about too, is I made a decision. Okay, if I want to change things, if I want to, influence things, then I need to do something. And so, Mackenzie and I started a nonprofit, and we started a radio station, and then I decided to do a podcast. And we've been actually pretty successful with it, which has been surprising. So I'm finding that, and that's why I really wanted to get you on the show, because it really touches me. It rings true, and I know better too, because as a student of sociology and as someone who's been a fan of Einstein and Tesla, it's not like that was new to me, but I think that it's taken me a while to realize the profoundness of it all, and that and again, like I said in the beginning, it is very, very difficult to understand, even knowing it, right, that our thoughts can literally transition into things in the material world, because and again, when you first hear that, even like quantum physics is hard to kind of grasp, this idea that things change based on observation.
Absolutely. Well, if you combine the notion, if you combine the notion that the screens that we're talking on, and the technology we're speaking on, and the clothes you're wearing, and the chair we're sitting on, and the table we're leaning against right now to have this conversation, was once a thought, and it made itself into physical representation in the world. So if we believe that these things are real and tangible, and they're we can touch them, and we say they're real, these tangible things are real, Barry, I can see them and touch them, then why can't the future that we want for ourselves be the same way? Like these are things
a very good way to put it.
Yeah, because even the studios that we're speaking in, like the architecture of the studios, the color of the walls, some interior designer had a thought about a color of the paint. All of a sudden, this neutral color that they chose that we're speaking in, or whatever you decide to consider, it was a thought in someone's brain that it made itself into tangible reality that we're actually experiencing, but we don't give any understanding to that because it's just part of our world. But everything that exists in the world today, what that is man-made, had come from someone's subconscious to their conscious, to their drawing boards, to the manufacturing plants, to the retail store, to us buying it, to implementing it in our lives. And so what we're saying is that thoughts do definitely become things because we're
Yeah.
the examples in our worlds. Yeah, so that's the way I view it anyway, and yeah, it's ultimately true.
Well, again, I want to encourage people now. They can pre-order. Your book is not out yet, the new book, but people, if I
Yeah,
understand it correctly, can pre-order the book for I think $25 on
correct.
your
On the
website.
website. Correct. Yeah, spot on. Just go to barrynicolau.com. You'll see some of the work I do with corporates there, and you can just pre-order it. We've currently got about 3,300 pre-orders, which is really exciting for me because the first book, we didn't do a pre-order scenario. So this is really exciting for the pre-order scenario. So if you want to hop on, $25 Australian, which would be less in US dollars, I'm thinking it might be like $16, $17 US. So yeah, grab it. I'll send it to you in the States, and yeah, it's very exciting. It's a very exciting scenario to be in.
Yeah, I'm going to order it as soon as we're done here.
Yeah.
Again, I can't. I'll explain. Usually, my audience is familiar that I usually read, my guest books. And as I was explaining to Barry, I've been having this just difficulty with headaches, and so reading has been very, very difficult. So I haven't yet finished Barry's first book, but I'm absolutely loving it so far. Um, and again, I really want people to again, my initial impression was that it was going to be one of those sort of self-helpish kind of books about business.
Mm,
Not the case
mm,
at all. And you relate so many personal stories,
mm,
and
mm,
explain things in a way that I think really, hits the nail on the head. Because I mean, these
mm.
these are very elaborate, complex topics, really. And the way you explain, I mean, you have a real talent for writing. The way that you put
Thank
words
you.
together
Thank you,
and the
Sean.
stories that you tell. I love the book, and so I cannot wait. I'm going to visualize February being here tomorrow,
You're a good man.
so I can get moving the mountain intentions reset because I really want to read this new book, and
Thank
definitely
you.
want to have you back, Barry.
Thank you,
Hopefully we
Sean.
won't have all these technical problems. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And please, people, go to the website, pre-order the book, Move the Mountain, Intention Reset. And if you go on Amazon.com right now, you can get the 11 Master Secrets to Business Success and Personal Fulfillment. And I'm just going to throw this out there again. Number one, international bestseller. Uh,
Yeah.
so, it's good. So go and get it. And we will see you guys here next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Thank you all for listening. This has been Coup Save America. And I want to thank your guest, Barry. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's beautiful to be here.
Thank you. We'll see
Thank
you
you.
guys next Tuesday.